Okay, so we are starting to have people join us. So thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on current developments in Russian-occupied Crimea, human rights situations, and Russia's military buildup. My name is Oryza Zakidalsky. I am the Senior Policy Advisor for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. We are co-hosting this event with the Human Rights Research and Education Center at the University of Ottawa and the Embassy of Ukraine to Canada. Just one note for anyone who's joining us who has questions, you can use the Q&A function in Zoom and send questions, and our moderator will take them in the Q&A part. With that, I turn it over to Professor John Packer, our moderator, who's the director of the Human Rights Research and Education Center and the Neuberger Jessen Professor of International Conflict Resolution at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. Professor Packer, please.
Thank you so much, Orest, and let me express immediately my great appreciation for this collaboration we have today with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, with the Embassy of Ukraine, and of course our Center for Human Rights and Research at the University of Ottawa. Really think this is a timely session, and we are honored to have very important contributors today. I say timely, not only in terms of recognizing now as the years, unfortunately, years go by, but I think we are at a point in the world where focusing just now on the essential and really fundamental importance of respect for human rights on a universal basis, and specifically to uphold the cornerstones of international law and relations that have been constructed not only since the United Nations, but even beyond that, further back, in terms of respect for territorial integrity of states, for recognition and respect of frontiers, and for sovereignty, but specifically based on the balanced ideas that the interests of the community, international community as a whole, depend on each state respecting within its jurisdiction the respect for human rights, and of course respecting the human rights of persons elsewhere in the world. We're now living in a complex, interdependent world, and these kind of interpositions, interventions, as we have seen in the case of Crimea and ongoing in Eastern Ukraine, are unfortunately being also repeated in some other parts of the world, and really raise a question at the universal level of the importance of these norms and standards, which all persons of goodwill, of respect for law, and of course for universal human rights, we must stand up and we must address. We have today our two principal speakers are really, we couldn't choose or find better, and we're deeply honored to have them join with us. We have Her Excellency Emine Dzhaparova, who is the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. I will mention a few things about her just when we introduce her in a moment. And we also have Dr. Anton Korynevych, who's a permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, who's going to speak after. But before doing so, it's my pleasure now to pass the word to the President of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Ms. Alexandra Chyczij. And I'll just say a word about her own background. She's been president of the UCC for the last few years. And of course, for those who are joining us interested in this subject who are not so familiar with UCC, it is the principal association body of Ukrainian Canadians, which is one of Canada's oldest and largest ethnocultural communities, numbering 1.25 million Canadians, very active. I have many Canadians have relatives or one way or another, myself included, from the Ukrainian Canadian community. But also to say that Ms. Chyczij had a very important role as co-counsel with our own Justice John Czapinka some years ago in the International Commission of Inquiry into the 1932-33 famine in Ukraine, which was convened by the World Congress of Free Ukrainians in 1988. So she has demonstrated long and specific knowledge bases. Ms. Chyczij, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Packer. It's my honor today to welcome everyone on behalf of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank our partners, Professor Packer from the University of Ottawa and Ambassador Shevchenko from the Ukrainian Embassy in Canada. And of course, a special welcome to our guests, Emine Dzhaparova and Dr. Anton Korynevych. Yesterday, we solemnly commemorated the 77th anniversary of the genocide of the Crimean Tatar people. In 1944, the communist regime forcibly and violently deported the entire Crimean Tatar people from their ancestral homeland. Almost half of those deported perished in the first year of exile. And of course, the Crimean Tatars were not allowed to return to their homeland for almost 5 decades. Unfortunately, today, 7 years after Russia invaded and occupied Crimea, the indigenous people of Crimea are again facing systemic repression, suppression, and persecution of their human rights by a foreign occupier. For the elders of the Crimean Tatar people who survived the 1944 genocide, this is the second time in their lives that they are being attacked in their homeland. We have on many occasions welcomed here in Canada brave leaders such as Mustafa Dzhemiliev, who was a small child during the deportation, but he went on to serve many years in prison in the Soviet Gulag for standing up for the rights of his people. Today, he is one of the leaders of the Crimean Tatar people as they courageously resist Russia's occupation. Since the beginning of the Russian occupation, the Kremlin has moved an enormous amount of weaponry and materiel into occupied Crimea, making it into an armed military camp. And in recent weeks, Russia has moved even more troops and weaponry into occupied Crimea, and of course, to the Ukrainian border in the east, near the Russian occupied territories of eastern Ukraine, threatening further escalation of Russia's war against Ukraine. So it is vital that we support the rights of the Crimean Tatar people and all those living under Russian occupation, and do all that we can to keep the issue of the horrendous human rights violations that are ongoing in Crimea front and center on the agenda of our governments. It's equally important that the political prisoners that Russia is jailing know that the world has not forgotten about them and that there is international pressure for their release. The UCC, of course, will continue to work on these issues and will ensure that our Canadian government and the international community respond strongly to Russia's belligerence and violations of international law. We very much look forward now to hearing from Deputy Minister Dzhaparova and Dr. Korynevych on how the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government are responding to these challenges and what we can do to help them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks and for reminding us and for those of you who are perhaps introduced to this story, not a new story, and the successive forced exoduses of the Crimean Tatars. It was my honor and pleasure in the 1990s to help work as a legal advisor in the OSCE on making the arrangements for the return of Crimean Tatars, mainly from Central Asia, and helping to negotiate the terms of restitution of property and so forth. At that time with Mr. Dzhemiliev, Mr. Rifat Chubarev at the time, who was the chair of the Majlis, and others. And now we have another great representative, the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Ms. Dzhaparova. But let me just, by way of introducing her, remark that she has her own interesting professional background, not just as a politician, but also as a journalist. She is educated in international relations from the Shevchenko National University in Kiev. But after that, she worked both for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and then later in the media as a well-known host and an author, working specifically for Crimean Tatar television and for Zaman News, editor-in-chief of Zaman News. She's been a freelance journalist and obviously therefore investigating and bringing to the world news of situations. And subsequently, she became an advisor of the Ministry of Information Policy regarding Crimea, eventually the first deputy minister of Information Policy of Ukraine, and now since a year ago or 11 months ago, appointed as first deputy minister of Foreign Affairs. So it's great honor, and really we're delighted to have the opportunity to hear from Ms. Dzhaparova. You have the floor.
Thank you, Professor, for presenting in details some of the pages of my biography. Let me, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, express sincere gratitude to all those who arranged the meeting and a chance for me and Anton, who is a great friend of mine, to share some of the recent events concerning the situation in Crimea, what Crimea has turned to after the occupation, and what is our domestic and international response, and what could it be in terms of to shape those challenges, because of course we all know that there is no magic wand or there is no silver bullet that can crack the nut. I think that is almost, and it is also about our common responsibility to look for the ways of the deoccupation. And let me also express gratitude to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, to the Human Rights Center of Ottawa University, and of course to our great team and Ambassador Shevchenko and his team for arranging this event. And also to Madam Alexandra, who rightly pointed to the day that we commemorated, not only in Ukraine, but worldwide. And let me also express my gratitude to Minister of Foreign Affairs, Garneau, for presenting his position and for expressing his kind of sentiment towards the deportation and the exile of the Crimean Tatars. And also, as far as I know, the Crimean Tatar flag was raised over the city hall of Fredericton. And before, in the previous years, it was Ottawa, it was Winnipeg, it was Toronto and Edmonton, where the flag was also raised in previous years. So for us, for Crimean Tatars, it's a great signal of solidarity. And this is exactly what people track living under occupation, where the fear is the greatest feeling or the highest feeling that people can live with under occupation. So let me also go to the presentation that I have prepared for you. I will share it. Just give me a second. I hope you can see it. Please confirm it, Professor Pekka.
Yeah.
Can you see the presentation? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I will just briefly speak a little bit of where we are and what Crimea has turned to. And I know that Anton will also follow this line, giving you more details about the situation in Crimea. And I will mostly focus on the Crimea platform. But before I go to the presentation, following Alexandra's words, she said that the 2014 events, the occupation, is the second act that actually persecutes Crimean Tatars as indigenous people. But I think that there is a much deeper historical context, because everything started actually in 18th century, in 1793, when Russian Empire, namely Catherine II, she annexed Crimea for the first time. And the first step she did, all those who were not ready to bow in front of the Catherine II and accept that reality at that days, and we can understand it, you know, kind of looking where we are today. Those Crimean Tatars, those elite, those religious elite, those aristocrats of Crimean Tatars, they were exiled and they were let and forced to immigrate mostly to Ottoman Empire at that times. But within 100 years after the first annexation, 1/3 of indigenous Crimean Tatar population left and abandoned Crimea. Then, of course, the deportation of 1944 that really put Crimean Tatars under the risk of physical existence. And of course, 2014, that automatically brought Crimean Tatars into this feeling of desperation, where Russia is again as an oppressor, as an authoritarian regime persecutes Crimean Tatars in their homeland. So I think that it's really crucial to understand this historical context, and I think that if the representatives of our Ukrainska Hromada can listen to us, I think that this is something that Ukrainians can understand, because the idea of empire and then communist regime was to erase the strong Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian identity. Ukrainians had Holodomor, Crimean Tatars deportation. There was this whole story of falsification of history of both Ukrainian and Crimean Tatars. And I think that we, at this moment, also deal with those consequences of those repressive policies of Russian Empire towards both of our nations, Crimean Tatar and Ukrainians. And I think that there is a great lesson that we have to learn to be united. But I think that it's also our common response to be internationally united in order to deal with the Crimean issue. So what Crimea has turned to at the moment, let us not have an illusion that it's a touristic pearl, as the Russian officials, diplomats, media can declare. It's a military base with actually 2.5 Ukrainian citizens as hostages, where forced conscription takes place, and over these years, within these years of occupation, almost 30,000 of persons were forcibly conscripted into the Russian army. Militarization, not only in terms of the military buildup on the peninsula, physically, I mean, but also a great level of the militarization of education and propaganda of war among minors, with 200,000 of children involved into these different state programs of education, where there is a glorification of army in different with different instruments. But what actually is the most concerning factor, and very traditional one for Russia, I would say, is this forcible demographic change. Something that happened in 18th century, something that used to be a case after the deportation in 1944, and something that is being actively taking place today in today's reality. Where with this repressive reality, when anyone who can dare to say that Crimea is Ukraine can be put into prison for at least 5 years under the criminal code. And with this repressive reality, those loyal Ukrainian citizens, Crimean Tatars, they abandoned Crimea. We don't have official statistics because many of those Crimean inhabitants, they don't take the registration as IDPs, as internally displaced persons, considering it to be discriminatory. But what we know for sure that hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens already brought to the peninsula, and at least 500,000 of newcomers are already in Crimea. And by doing so, Russia is changing the demography, which is also considered to be a war crime. Of course, political persecutions are also there. If we speak about Crimean Tatars, we used to be labeled as betrayers and collaborators with Nazi Germany. Today, there is a new phenomenon. We've been called extremists and terrorists, and you know that in 2016, the Supreme Court of Russia declared the self-governing body, the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people that you, Professor Pekka, referred to in your speech. It was banned and called to be an extremist organization. We know that potentially thousands of Crimean Tatars can be persecuted with regards to their affiliation to the Majlis and the bunch of the filias of Majlis throughout Crimea. Cultural suppression is also there, suppression of religious freedoms, of course, forcing the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and large-scale crackdown on Muslims, where people in mosques, they have been just, taken to the prisons and claimed to be terrorists and extremists, but somehow before 2014, we never ever had any case of extremism in Ukraine. And I think that it's also important to know that this is a kind of a bubble that Russia is trying to shape. And with these active measures of finding those extremists and putting, a bunch of people to the prisons is also something that they're trying to justify this crime. curtailment of freedom of expression in media. And of course, as a journalist, I witnessed how it happened when a number of media outlets, they were refused to have registration and thus abandoned Crimea, and today operate in exile, I would say, mostly Crimean Tatars like the ATR channel, the Black Sea News channel, the Center for Journalistic Investigations, and many more. Tortures, forced disappearance, impunity, also something that is of a reality. The Russian military buildup is something that not only Ukraine concerned about, but also the Black Sea region and the European countries, where we see that the Azov Sea has almost turned into the inner lake of Russian Federation, where there is a systematical blockade of the Kerch Strait and passage of the trade vessels into the Ukrainian ports in Berdyansk and Mariupol via the Kerch Strait. And the recent decision of Russia under the pretext of military exercises to stop the passage till October 2021 is yet another demonstration of their dominance. And by doing so, I think that they not only demonstrate their dominance, but also test the international response to these challenges. Since 2014, Russia has more than tripled its military presence in the peninsula, and currently there are up to 40,000 of military personnel. So what is our response to those challenges? Because let me be very clear and honest with you that for 7 years, almost 8 years of occupation, there is a feeling that the whole world is, or there is a normalization of the occupation, or the world has been reconciled, let's say, with the occupation, you know, just having statements and declarations from time to time. We have resolutions in the United Nations, but I think that this is not enough, because the biggest dream of any criminal is to hide the crime. And this is exactly what Russia has been dreaming about, so that nobody speaks about Crimea. And as soon as we declared or launched this initiative of Crimea Platform, which is supposed to be a coordination format, a format for dialogue, a format for a common response to the bunch of the challenges with the occupation, Russia immediately said that they consider this initiative as a threat to their territorial integrity and security. And of course, what we see today is that they are trying first to discredit the Crimea Platform initiative, second to, let's say, use their instruments of influence, how to make the others not to attend the summit, the inaugural summit that will take place in August 23rd. In Kiev, under the invitation of President Zelensky, and I will speak a bit more in details within the other slides. The Ukrainian response was that a couple of months ago, our Security and Defense Council has adopted the strategy on deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea, that actually, which is a frame document, and it gives actually the policy direction in legal, information, administrative and territorial policies, economic, humanitarian, foreign policy, social, protection of human rights and freedoms, enhancing the legislation. And of course, what we are now working on is to develop a practical action plan so that we can implement this strategy. And the Crimea Platform as an instrument is a direct consequence of this strategy. The strategic goal that has been also provided in the strategy, and we determine it as the goal of the Crimea Platform, is the occupation of Crimea. But we also understand that the occupation is our ultimate goal, and there is a path for that. So we have to start with the first step in order to get to this ultimate destination of the occupation. So tactically, We have to get Crimea back into the international agenda, to the attention of the leaders, and the Crimea Platform and those dimensions that I will show you are about raising the discourse about Crimea, is about having this ecosystem of events and initiatives and advocacy and public diplomacy projects that are about making the cause of Crimea much more articulated and visible in terms of the international agenda. The elements, there are three elements that we kind of consider as the philosophy of the Crimea Platform is strategic vision, and then consolidation of efforts. And the Crimea Platform, we do consolidate these efforts, and we believe that only synergy can bring us to this ultimate destination of the occupation. So there are 5 priorities of the Crimea Platform at this stage of its, let's say, existence. Consolidation of non-recognition policy, sanctions, which is about proper implementation and strengthening. Of course, it's a very sensitive issue for many of those countries whom we are now discussing the document that will be adopted during the inaugural summit. But I think that if we speak about political and diplomatic frame, there are few instruments of pressure, and sanction is a very practical one. And I think that we have Russia that understands the language of force, and I think that we have to be a bit more inventive and a bit more decisive in terms of providing our policy of non-recognition and policy of pressure in order to get some of the safeguards that can help people under the occupation and help Ukraine to fight for their right. Security, including freedom of navigation, protection of human rights and international humanitarian law, and overcoming negative consequences on economy and environment. So this is how the Crimea Platform architecture looks like. The heads of state and government, and to launch this platform, we will have and hold the inaugural summit 23rd of August, which is a very symbolic day, a day before the 30th anniversary of Ukrainian independence. Pact Ribbentrop-Molotov, you know, this also document, which is, for example, very sensitive in Baltic states. So it's a very symbolic date. And then the ministers for foreign affairs, so the MFA will be actually the operational body of the Crimea Platform, then the parliament level, and the parliament has different tasks. First, to strengthen the domestic response, and there is a bunch of the laws and draft laws to be adopted within the Crimea Platform and before the summit. And by the way, the most, let's say, fresh decision of our president yesterday while addressing the Crimean Tatars at this commemoration day of 18th of May, the deportation day, he actually submitted an urgent draft law to the consideration of the Ukrainian parliament on indigenous peoples of Ukraine. And of course, Canada and Ukraine are those countries who reconsidered their policies towards indigenous people. And of course, we have joined the family of democratic states, I would say. And if the Verkhovna Rada supports the draft law, and I believe that there is no chance but support, because we have this 7-year discourse about indigenous people, that the Karais, Krimchaks, and Crimean Tatars will be recognized as indigenous people of Ukraine. So the parliament also will focus on the international efforts, not only in the parliamentary assemblies of different organizations like NATO, OSCE, Council of Europe, but also the groups of friendship. So what we are addressing with the parliament, saying that the parliament should be an additional voice of Crimea, you know, pushing the statements, pushing the declarations, having events, having discussions, inviting experts, inviting the members of Majlis, so that the other parliaments and the members of parliament could know more about Crimea. And of course, the international export network, which we think is a very practical dimension. I will stop on that. here. So we have consulted over 80 NGOs and experts in Ukraine. At the moment, they're self-organizing the association of experts, and we will sign a memorandum of cooperation with MFA and those experts. And the idea is actually to help and advocate for the experts, not only in terms of the financial support, but also the expert diplomacy, because I think that it's crucial that those experts who develop analytics, researchers, and give us the facts, because of course, state officially is restricted in the capabilities of monitoring the situation on the ground in Crimea. And our NGOs, by having underground connections, they can do something that the states sometimes cannot do. And we have to get this, let's say, material and match those NGOs with the international think tanks, analytical centers, and to get the discourse out of Kiev, because Ukrainian society is pretty consolidated towards what Crimea is today, but also to bring this expert discourse and discussions to the other capitals, including the cities of Canada, the think tanks of Canada. And I believe that our embassy will also advocate for the expert dimension of the Crimea Platform. So the summit, we are at the moment working on the final document, which is of declaration nature. Probably it will be named as a charter or a declaration. We are in constant consultations with our partners working on the document, but it will be a codification of this non-recognition policy. It will condemn those crimes that Russia has been committing on an everyday basis in Crimea. And the inaugural summit will launch this Crimea Platform as an instrument of international effort. So this is very briefly what Crimea Platform is for. I will be happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you so much for that full and intriguing presentation. And I must say, I'm very glad to hear about the draft law that's being introduced. I personally was involved in 1996, the first post-Soviet constitution, and if I remember correctly, was Article 11 of the constitution, which provided that Ukraine was committed to respect and to contribute to the development of indigenous peoples and national minorities in Ukraine, pursuant to law. And I can't remember subsequent provisions which required that to be elaborated law. So this is great to see. I'm not sure which provisions exactly now, I haven't looked, but I think that's a very important development and definitely a resonance with Canada. It's now my pleasure and honor to introduce our second esteemed speaker, who is Dr. Anton Korynevych, who is the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And let me say that Dr. Korynevych can't be kind of better qualified also. He is himself a authority and a scholar in the field of public international law. He holds a doctorate and is associate professor of international law in the Department of the Institute of International Relations at the St. Taras Shevchenko National University in Kiev. And he's, let me just say in short, obviously been actively involved in a number of these specific subjects, specifically since 2014, when this was thrust upon much of Ukraine and the world. And so in the interest of time, Dr. Korynevych, let me just invite you to now deliver your remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor. Dear colleagues, esteemed audience, it's a big pleasure and honor to have the possibility to talk today to you and to share some views regarding the Crimean issues. And of course, I'm more than happy to say thank you to the organizers of this event, namely to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, to the Embassy of Ukraine in Canada in Ottawa, and to Human Rights Research and Educational Center in the University of Ottawa. Of course, doing such events for our international audience and for people who are interested in the issues of Crimea worldwide. This is very much appreciated. And of course, I am more than happy and pleased to talk after Her Excellency Ms. Emine Dzhaparova, with whom we work together on the issues of Crimea. And if she is more concentrated, of course, on the issues of foreign policy. Our authority, we are trying to deal with the internal sphere and with internal implementation of different spheres and subjects. I'm really happy to greet you from actually administrative boundary line with Crimea. So I'm currently in Kherson Oblast, and today we had a great visit to the administrative boundary line with Crimea, together with the chairman of the Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people, Mr. Rifat Chubarov, and together with the 3 ambassadors of Nordic countries in Ukraine, namely Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. So we are also engaged in this, I would say, work with international partners together to tackle the questions which we have due to the occupation of Crimea. Before starting to go throughout the presentation, which talks about the priorities and plans on Crimea for 2021, both of our authority, of the mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and the state of Ukraine in general in whole, I would like to mention that, of course, the human rights situation in Crimea deteriorates permanently. So there is no positive changes, any positive change. There is no positive tendencies at all. And of course, the systematic persecution of Crimean Tatars and pro-Ukrainian activists, it continues. And such persecution results in illegal detentions of Ukrainian citizens for expressing their pro-Ukrainian position, and some of them then becoming political prisoners on charges of extremism and terrorism and etc. As of now, there are more than 100 Ukrainian citizens who are political prisoners detained by the Russian occupation authorities, and most of them are Crimean Tatars. And we are sure that it is very important to sound the names of political prisoners so that both Ukrainian state authorities and the international community understand that these are particular persons, particular Ukrainian citizens who are charged and being in jail for committing no crime. These are, for instance, Server Mustafayev, Seyran Saliyev, Emir Hussein Kuku, Volodymyr Dudka, Alexei Besarabov, and many, many others. Forced conscription to the armed forces of the occupying power is really one of the most systematic war crimes committed by the Russian occupation authorities in Crimea. It started in spring 2015, and it continues. It continues without any breaks, without any alterations. And as of now, more than 28,000 of Ukrainian citizens from Crimea have been conscripted to the armed forces of the Russian occupation authorities, to the Russian armed forces. And actually, this has continued during the COVID-19 pandemics. So there were no changes due to COVID-19 pandemics in this case. Militarization also affects education in the temporarily occupied Crimea. Children at schools, so kids study the basics of military training within the framework of movements Yunarmia, Russian so-called Kazakh schools and Kazakh classes. So Ukrainian Crimean children are taught how to fight. Education in the temporarily occupied Crimea has another problematic dimension about which Her Excellency Ms. Dzhaparova was already talking, the erasure of Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar national identity, in particular by limiting education in the Crimean Tatar language and closing schools with Ukrainian as a language of occupation. Occupation authorities also systematically use the transfer of citizens of the Russian Federation to the temporarily occupied territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea due to the fact that they want to change the demographic composition of Crimea. And another problematic issue is the forced Russian citizenship in the territory of Crimea. Thus, we consider that this is one of the new forms of hybrid warfare which we can see in Russia's policy against Ukraine. And of course, the violations of the religious rights of the Crimean diocese of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, of different religious groups, namely Muslim groups, of different Protestant groups and other groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses, who are proclaimed extremist organizations. Of course, is a very big violation, a huge violation of human rights. And of course, talking to you today on the 19th of May, I may not tell about the issue of Crimean Tatars, the indigenous people of Crimea and of Ukraine, who face persecution by the Russian occupation authorities as they have a pro-Ukrainian position and are not loyal to the regime of the occupation authorities. The Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, the principal self-governing body of the Crimean Tatar people, is proclaimed as extremist organization in the Russian Federation, and its activity is deemed to be illegal. All in all, to finalize maybe this starting point, just to show you that Crimea is really a gray zone, a zone where law and rules of law, international humanitarian law, of human rights law do not work at all. And unfortunately, anybody can be charged with extremism, terrorism, and anybody can become an object of illegal searches, illegal detentions, and illegal court decisions, and go to jail for 15, 17, 19 years for commission of no crime. And that is why we work and we try to do all that we can on the governmentally controlled territory in order to try to assist our citizens who reside in Crimea, to assist IDPs, and in order to bring Crimean issue high on the agenda, both internationally and of course internally. So we can move closely over the priorities and plans on Crimea for the year 2021. And I'm very happy to say that some of them are already reached and some of them are already done. And that makes me positive thinking that we can do a lot of things. So if we can move forward with the slides. So first, Crimea Platform. Of course, I will not talk a lot about this because Her Excellency is a brilliant speaker on this issue. For us as a presidential authority, it is very important that the Crimean summit should be held on the highest possible level, on the level of heads of state and heads of governments on the 23rd of August in the city of Kyiv. Of course, a signing of the Crimean Charter or of the Crimean Declaration, which would implement all the positions concerning the non-recognition policy, will be very much appreciated by us and is seen as one of the main instruments of moving forward with the Crimean Platform process. And that is why for us, it is very important that Crimean Platform becomes a sustainable and ongoing process, which includes internal dimension and which includes work of Ukrainian state authorities with international partners and friends of Ukraine, so that the 23rd of August is really the inaugural summit and the starting point. And the Crimean Platform becomes the permanent platform, the permanent place where we can talk about Crimea, when we can cooperate and collaborate regarding Crimea with our international partners. And that is why it is also important for us to suggest the projects for our international partners who can actually implement these projects inside Ukraine. May I ask for the next slide, please, dear Orest? So the second issue is the one which we are very happy and proud that we have, the strategy of deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea. And if the Crimean Platform is seen as a key foreign policy priority of Ukraine in the issue of work on Crimea, so the strategy of deoccupation and reintegration is the most important internal document, which is a framework one, but which governs all the activity of Ukrainian state authorities on Crimea, so that this is a direct legal instruction concerning the legal actions of all of us, of all of the representatives of Ukrainian state authorities on Crimea. And I am very happy that on the 24th of March, the president signed the respective decree and the strategy is now in force. This is something which we waited for since 2014. And I'm very happy that the team of MFA, our team, the team of National Defense and Security Council of Ukraine, of the Office of the President. So it was really a brilliant example of cooperation. and that now our state, Ukraine, we do have the strategy of the occupation and reintegration of Crimea as a legally binding document. Can I ask for the next slide, please? Since I'm the president's representative for Crimea, it is very important for us to keep ties with Ukrainian citizens who reside in Crimea, so who reside in the temporarily occupied territories. We are on constant contact with Crimeans on the daily basis. And so that we kind of know from the soil, from the ground, what are the problems and what are the issues and which issues we can solve or assist our Ukrainian citizens in Crimea with. So of course, for us, the priority is the improvement of administrative services. And this includes online services, so that some of the administrative services from the state can be taken through online, through using mobile phone or computer, laptop. And this is already a priority for the Ministry of Digitalization for this year, for 2021. So we hope that some of the administrative services of the state, they can already be taken to online sphere in this year. Also, we are now implementing a project of building a service hub on Chongar checkpoint. We have 3 checkpoints, which are legal ways to enter temporarily occupied Crimea: Kalanchak, Chaplinka, and Chongar. And 2 of them, Kalanchak and Chongar, were renovated in November and December 2019. Within the order of the President of Ukraine, His Excellency, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky. And in Chongar checkpoint, we are now implementing a big service hub, which would include all the services which are mostly needed by our citizens in Crimea. So that directly on the ABL, on the administrative boundary line, people from Crimea, our Ukrainian citizens, can get as many services as we can provide to them. Education in Ukrainian universities. Last summer, the president submitted to the Rada, to the Parliament of Ukraine, and the Rada voted for the law which enables every Crimean pupil enter Ukrainian universities without any exams. So this is really a very important reintegration measure, and the number of Crimean students who are now taught in Ukrainian universities became bigger due to this new law. It is very important for us, of course, to provide medical services for Crimean residents on the governmentally controlled territories, and also to have the development of Crimean Tatar language. Crimean Tatar language, which of course is the language of the Crimean Tatar indigenous people, and which needs protection and assistance from the state. And now, nowadays, the strategy of development of Crimean Tatar language is being developed. And the concept of development of Crimean Tatar language in Ukraine is already adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, so that we are moving on this track to support the Crimean Tatar language, the language of indigenous Crimean Tatar people. Can we move to the next slide, please? Also, when we talk about Crimea and deoccupation and reintegration, we also talk about transitional justice, because we understand that transitional justice is one of the important elements of the state's policy of deoccupation and reintegration. And namely, transitional justice is inside the strategy of deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea. So it is one of the pillars, one of the key elements of the Ukrainian policy of deoccupation and reintegration. And we have a respective working group on reintegration of temporarily occupied territories within the Commission on Legal Reform. And this working group has prepared a draft national transitional justice model for Ukraine. And we hope that it can have a future of becoming a decree of the President of Ukraine. But as of now, even without the adopted fully fledged national transitional justice model, we already have implementation of different elements of transitional justice in policies and processes within different state authorities, namely mission of the President of Ukraine in Crimea, Prosecutor's General Office, Prosecutor's Office of Crimea, National Police Department in Crimea, Ministry of Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, non-governmental expert organizations. So we are sure that there can be no alternative to uses of transitional justice elements in Ukraine in relation to both Crimea and Donbass. May I ask for the next slide, please? On the 26th of February 2021, this day was a great one for us, because last year in 2020, His Excellency, the President Volodymyr Zelensky, officially established the Day of Resistance to the occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. And today, and this year, we had an address by the President, a big TV marathon, a meeting of the National Defense and Security Council, a special decree of the President of Ukraine concerning different issues relating to the occupation of Crimea. And I hope that this tradition of remembering the resistance to the occupation of Crimea and to commemorate the date of the 26th of February is becoming a real tradition in Ukraine, and we will try hard in order to keep this live. Can I ask for the next slide, please? Political prisoners. We are in constant contact with the lawyers who defend political prisoners, both in Russian courts and in so-called courts in the occupied Crimea. It is very important to keep the issue high on the agenda, and both internationally and internally. We have already established the relevant interdepartmental commission which assists political prisoners and their families with getting support from the state, namely the financial support to provide legal services or other services to political prisoners. And it is very important that one of the priorities which we consider we need to have, and one of the draft laws which we need to have adopted, is the draft law on political prisoners, prisoners of war and civilian hostages. So the law which would legally regulate all the issues concerning the state support to the issue of political prisoners. Can I kindly ask for the next slide, please? For us, for our mission of the President of Ukraine, it is important that we already have adopted the strategy of the work of the mission. We are moving towards the adoption of the National Transitional Justice model. We will be trying to, and we are trying to push all the issues related to Crimean Tatar indigenous people. And since here we do have Ukrainian speaking audience, I would kindly ask you, if you have time, to listen to the President's address in commemoration of the day of the remembrance of the victims of the genocide of Crimean Tatar people, which the President, His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, pronounced yesterday. Since we have the comments from Crimeans, Crimean Tatars, and other Ukrainian citizens of Crimea, this is a very strong address by the President to Crimean Tatars. And of course, the thing which Ms. Dzhaparova mentioned, the historical day was yesterday, because the President submitted to the Rada, to the Parliament of Ukraine, the draft law on indigenous people, which would regulate the status of indigenous people in Ukraine and which would give the status to the Crimean Tatar people. So Crimean Tatar people issues are, of course, high on the agenda for us, and we are sure that to move on the path, on the track of the occupation and reintegration of Crimea, we should also work on the issues of the support to the indigenous people of Crimean Tatar. So this is briefly the issues of which we work on. I thank you for your attention, and if we can have some questions or comments, I will be happy to. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, dear Professor.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Korynevych. We've now had two very full and comprehensive presentations, a lot of information. I think it's quite encouraging to see all the work that's been done, the elaboration of the programs of policy, the draft law today. I've seen a few people interested where we can also maybe see that. Now we have shortened time, unfortunately, in terms of questions, but there is a Q&A function on the Zoom function for those who, the Zoom platform, those who wish to put a question. So far, I've seen one that occurs in the Ukrainian language, and I apologize, I do not speak Ukrainian, so I cannot read it. So I don't know if Orest or Ihor, you're able to read the question, but there was one question in the chat, or rather an expression of interest, which was the ongoing position or collaboration with Turkey, which has, of course, been a longtime supporter of the Crimean Tatars. I myself was involved in some discussions in the past to get Turkish assistance for, I remember long ago, part of the repatriation in the 90s and 2000s, some housing construction and so forth. And of course, Turkey plays an important role in the region. So I don't know whether Dr. Korynevych or Her Excellency Mrs. Dzhaparova would wish to comment on the position these days of Turkey in this specific matter.
Yeah, I think I will take the question for myself. Indeed, Turkey is a strategic partner of Ukraine, sharing Black Sea and neighborhood, and also expressing unwavering support with regards to the Crimean Tatars. Yesterday, they have also stated, came up with a statement in support of Crimean Tatars. And what we had is actually two joint declarations of both presidents in terms of the Turkey's assurances to participate in the Crimea Platform framework. So at the moment, we are looking forward to get confirmation for the participation at the highest level. But also there is a huge potential to collaborate on the Black Sea security, and the security issue, militarization, the consequences is the priority within the questions, within the priorities that we declare for ourselves. And we are planning to have an annual international forum in Odessa with regards to specifically address the questions of Black Sea and Azov security. And Turkey, not only on the official level, but also on the level of experts and academia, will be an active participant with this regard.
Well, thank you for that question. I do see there's also been a couple of questions in the Q&A expressed in English that I can read. One has to do with access to water issue. I'm not sure if that means internally or in terms of the international access regarding Crimea. I think you touched on that already, as Ms. Dzhaparova, with regard to shipping lines and access to the internal ports and so forth of Ukraine. But does either of you wish to comment on access to water question?
Yes, just I think, Anton, if you wish to begin.
Yeah. Thank you, dear Emine, dear professor, dear colleagues. The issue is very simple. There will be no water to Crimea before the occupation. Full stop. Or period. In the strategy of the occupation and reintegration of Crimea, we made a special provision that Ukraine would renew the water supply to Crimea after the occupation happens. This is the fact that under international humanitarian law, the occupying power, occupation authorities shall have satisfied all the needs of the civilian population in all the resources, and of course in water also. The shortages of water in Crimea might may be the result of the actions of the Russian Federation occupation authorities, of which Ms. Dzhaparova and myself we were talking, that they transfer citizens, that they have a big military forces there, that they actually change environment, construct big industrial infrastructural objects. But if Ukraine gave the water through the North Crimean Canal, this would be the solution of the most important problem for the Russian occupation authorities, which they cannot handle, cannot solve for 70 years. So under international law, the Russian Federation occupation authorities should themselves solve this issue. And under the strategy of the occupation and reintegration of Crimea, Ukraine shall renew the water supply after the occupation happens.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Now I understand what the reference is, which is obviously very important and is a matter, again, of international law. I understand that the question expressed in Ukrainian language was actually about the Canada-Ukrainian Parliamentary Internship Program, which apparently at that level is currently in suspension or in abeyance. However, our friends in the Ukrainian Canadian Congress have their own parliamentary internship program, which is available or open, and information can be obtained on that on the ucc.ca website if you go to program and parliamentary internship program. So those who might be interested, I understand it's a wonderful program. I've had my own contacts with previous interns who have been impressive and I think had a great opportunity. And that's a kind of collaboration I commend to anyone who could take advantage. Turning back to questions for our two contributors, there's a question also about the active engagement of NGOs, specifically on the Crimea Platform. I also noticed that there was the opportunity of an expert body and so forth. I think that's increasingly important in the complex interdependent world we live in, how NGOs around the world, which may not be specifically Crimea Tatar or Crimea interested, they may be interested in the subject matter as a whole. As I say, this has importance for the world. So perhaps, Ms. Dzhaparova, you could comment on where you see the opportunities and kind of the vision of the Crimea Platform for NGOs and for the academic or scholarly expert community.
Thank you, Professor. But before I go to this question, I will also comment a little bit on the water issue, because it's really turned out to be a sensitive issue, because Russia has been constantly speculating on this issue with regards to the Human Rights Council, in different international forums, in Strasbourg, in Vienna, in Geneva, and trying to demonstrate and show Ukraine as a barbaric state who does not think of people but first. And as my friend Anton said, there is international law that actually says that the resources should be supplied by the occupying power, and this is a direct responsibility of any occupying power. So our position is very clear, and we articulate it on different levels to our international partners. As for the expert dimension, as I told to all of who listen to us, it's a super important dimension of the making the Crimean issue much more articulated. At the moment, those NGOs in Ukraine, they are shaping the association of experts. It's an inner discussion. We are, as an MFA, do not interfere at all, because there is a principle of non-interference, because this is a civil society and we respect this right. But as an MFA, as far as we initiated this, we requested the civil society community to actually self-organize into the association. And then after signing the memorandum, our embassies will actually represent the contacts, the expert dimension, and the possible cooperation between this association and those willing to participate and those willing to cooperate in different states, in different capitals. So those are think tanks and NGOs. Not only in terms of these priorities that we declare, but also on many other issues, including Crimean Tatars and the protection of indigenous people. So there is a huge potential for cooperation, because I think that the main thing and the main tactical task for us is to take the issue, is to take the discussion out of Kyiv, is to raise this volume higher track in different other cities, not only by the means of public diplomacy, but also by stimulating and galvanizing and motivating to come up and develop common researches, because it's new. I mean, Ambassador Georgian ambassador to Canada, he rightly said that they experienced the same situation where 20% of their territory is under occupation and 300,000 of IDPs. We have 7% of territories under occupation, 1.5 million of IDPs, and there is much more in common that we can commonly do. But this is something new. I mean, we see how Russia is aggressive, not only in this region, but also we see that Crimea has been used as a projection of power into the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. And of course, I think that common analytics, researchers, and events is something that should be a very practical deliverable of this expert dimension of the Crimea Platform.
Thank you very much, and for drawing that attention. Also, the comment from the Georgian ambassador, country that I have also been long involved in and am still. There is definitely much that is similar and issues here to be looked at in terms of conceptual framing, but also practical engagements, the effects on the population from humanitarian perspectives, from environmental perspectives. So I commend that as a fruitful avenue of analysis and way forward. There's another interesting, I should say, I did put for those who are interested in the internship program, I put it in the general chat box, the link to the UCC website. There's also an important question regarding Turkey's position, and more broadly, I think, on the Blue Stream project, the gas project through the Black Sea, which of course is part of the larger picture. I'm not sure who feels most appropriate to respond to this of either of our two speakers, so I'll let you choose. But going forward, I think this is a subject. I mean, there have been issues in the press too of finding ways around alternatives and so forth. And what can others, Canada and others, do? I'm not sure if perhaps the deputy minister might wish to comment.
We do not discuss this issue with regards to the Crimea Platform activities, so I don't feel like commenting the question.
Okay, yeah, it's certainly one of larger context, I would say, but it's one raised, and it is one that's in the back of the minds of a lot of people, and I think that has kind of geopolitical significance also. I can say, just for the person asking, that Turkey is hugely dependent, and as part of the complex interdependence, I think something like 70+% of their own import of gas comes from Russia directly, I think, and another substantial part comes through by means affected by Russia through the Central Asian states. So there are massive issues here of dependency. I'm conscious that we're getting close to about 1:15. I'm just checking if there are some other questions that have been posed in either the chat or the questions. I'm not seeing specifically. So if not, then let me just ask if either of your excellencies wish to make a final remark, and then I'm going to invite Ambassador Shevchenko to share some comments from on the behalf of the embassy. Would either Ms. Dzhaparova or Dr. Korynevych wish a final word? Okay, in that case, then it's my pleasure and my honor to invite Ambassador Shevchenko to say some closing remarks.
I'll just say that I think it was a wonderful insight on the situation in Crimea for the Canadian audience. And I honestly believe that Canada is in a natural leading position on human rights because of its exemplary domestic record on human rights, because it has been closely following all the developments in Crimea since 2014, and because of Canada's well-established reputation across the international community and specifically across the multinational organizations. I also want to acknowledge that this focus on Crimea and on Ukraine in general is in Canada across the political spectrum and across the civil society. And again, I want to acknowledge the great work which is done by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress to bring this issue well above the typical bilateral set of issues. And great thanks to Professor Packer for closely following this issue and for our long history of cooperation on this matter. Finally, I just want to share this picture, and I want to bring us back to what was mentioned by Deputy Minister Emine Dzhaparova in the beginning of our conversation. This is a beautiful picture from Fredericton, New Brunswick from yesterday, and we can see the Crimean Tatar flag and this beautiful Crimean Tatar tamga, and also the Ukrainian flag. And I think we are witnessing a very touching manifestation of Canadian support for the Crimean Tatars. It's part of a bigger tradition. Every year, one Canadian city lends its flagpoles to the Crimean Tatar flag. And I think every such event brings us closer to the day when these beautiful colors will return to the Crimean skies. And I strongly believe that the event that we are about to finish is also bringing that day closer to us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks and for bringing us that beautiful photo with the blues of the sky and the blues of the flag. And I know that's a reference to also the blues of the sea, and so the Black Sea, and very important for the solidarity, the symbolism, and people of goodwill. And so many people, when they hear the story and they understand the inherent injustices that are taking place, the sense of not just a kind of moral commitment, but a real movement that there needs to be, we can do something together as Canadians, as free countries, as democracies. So it's been a great honor to again be able to collaborate with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, with the Ukrainian Embassy. Let me thank the speakers again, the First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Emine Dzhaparova, the Permanent Representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, Dr. Anton Korynevych. And let me thank also the President of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Ms. Alexandra Chyczij. And finally, let me just say thank you so much to those behind the scenes without whom this couldn't have occurred, the great leadership within the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Thanks again. This webinar will be posted, informative information on it, in the UCC national YouTube channel. So you can check that out online, and please do share it with others. Thank you very much for everyone for listening, and have a nice day.